I don't think that anyone had ever thought that the once-in-a-century transformation of the auto industry will be a straight line. There will be peaks and troughs. And it's fair to say that right now, Mercedes finds itself in a trough. Because until very recently, Mercedes was pursuing an electric-first strategy with the aim of going fully EV by 2030. And to that end, it had developed a range of fully electric EQ models, bringing us cars like the EQE and EQS. A very different strategy, say, to BMW, that made sure to build flexibility into its new car platforms to make sure they could take both internal combustion and electric power. Fast forward a few years, and the EQE and EQS haven't sold as well as Mercedes hoped, forcing the brand to change strategy. And the car we're about to go and have a look at now proves it. Meet the new CLA, the first model to be built on the brand's all-new MMA platform. And that name is rather apt because this car is definitely spoiling for a fight. You see, the MMA platform, which stands for Mercedes Modular Architecture, not mixed martial arts, has been designed to house both electric and hybrid powertrains with little to no compromise. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty details, let's get some of the basics down first. Buyers of the new electric CLA, or CLA with EQ technology to give it its full name, will be able to choose between either a 58 kilowatt-hour battery or an 85 kilowatt-hour battery. And those will power a 268 brake horsepower electric motor mounted on the rear axle. That should give the base rear-wheel drive car plenty of punch, but if you want sports car performance, then you'll want to take a look at the four-wheel drive 4MATIC model. That gets an extra electric motor on the front axle, giving it an extra 107 brake horsepower. Now, Mercedes hasn't given us an official combined number, but if you do some basic arithmetic, it should put out around about 375 brake horsepower, giving it an official 0 to 62 mile an hour time of 4.9 seconds. That's quicker than the current Tesla Model 3 long range. But I know what you're thinking. All EVs these days are pretty punchy. What matters more is efficiency and range. Well, the good news is that the CLA takes a lot of technical inspiration from the Vision EQ XX concept. That's the car that did an astounding 8.4 miles per kilowatt hour when it crossed the Arabian Peninsula, doing over 600 miles on a charge, making it the longest range EV ever. The only thing is, that car was a concept. This car isn't, and it's already broken the world record for the amount of miles travelled in 24 hours by an EV. This thing covered 2,310 miles in just 24 hours around Italy's Nardo Ring. If you're wondering how it managed that, well, the CLA's body is incredibly slippery. It has a drag coefficient of just 0.21, which is better than the Tesla Model 3's 0.23, and it also gets a very clever 2-speed gearbox on the rear axle, much like you get in a Porsche Taycan or an Audi e-tron GT, and that means that this car is very efficient at motorway speeds. Mercedes claims that the rear-wheel drive big battery 250 Plus will be able to return an efficiency figure of 5.1 miles per kilowatt hour, which is astounding for an electric car. The best we've ever seen is 4.4 miles per kilowatt hour in the new Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive during our summer range test. And because of that level of efficiency, the CLA will also have a much better range than the Tesla. Mercedes has given us a preliminary figure of 492 miles for the 250 Plus and 478 miles for the four-wheel drive 4MATIC 350. That's a difference of just 14 miles between those two models, and that's surprising because usually we would expect to see a much greater loss in the four-wheel drive car. But Mercedes has got around that by giving this thing one hell of a party trick. While at a cruise, this car can fully decouple the front axle from the rear, and that reduces drive loss of the front axle by up to 90%. Mercedes has also used an 800-volt architecture for this car, allowing for up to 320 kilowatts of fast charging, so a 10 to 80% top-up could take as little as 10 minutes. What's more, all CLAs get a multi-source heat pump as standard. But what if you're not ready to take the plunge into full EV ownership? Well, like I explained earlier, this platform has been designed to accept both electric powertrains and hybrid powertrains, and the new hybrid system in this car is very clever. It pairs an all-new 1.5-litre engine with a 1.3 kilowatt-hour battery, a new e-motor, and an 8-speed automatic gearbox. And while this thing is technically a mild hybrid, Mercedes tells us that it will be able to travel for short periods on electric power at speeds of up to 62 miles an hour. Buyers will be able to choose from 3 power outputs. There's going to be 134 brake horsepower, 161 brake horsepower, and 188. And before you ask, no, there will not be a plug-in hybrid. Mercedes is expecting this car to return diesel-like efficiency figures, and by not filling it with heavy, expensive batteries, they should be able to keep the list price competitive. Not that they're going to tell us just now what the list price actually is. In terms of design, if we were to cover this with a sheet, you would see that the silhouette remains pretty faithful to the original CLA design. But if you look a bit closer, you can see that it's learned a lot of aerodynamic lessons from the EQS and EQE. If you look down here, you'll see it's got flush door handles. It's got very small side mirrors, and if we come around the front, you'll see that it's got a very curved face with these air intakes as well that are designed to bend the air around the front wheels for better aerodynamics. There's also something of a Mercedes-Benz 3-pointed logo theme going on. Mercedes tells us that these are not 3-pointed stars, they're a Mercedes signature, but you can clearly see where they've taken their inspiration. And if you look at the grille, well, I'm not going to count them all, but Mercedes has told me there is 142 individual 3-pointed stars, so that the person in front of you is not mistaken for what's behind them. Now, this logo is partially illuminated because here in Germany you can only illuminate a logo that's under 100 centimeters squared, but in the Chinese market this whole ring will be illuminated. Now, the outside of this car might look very familiar to current CLA owners, but the interior is completely different, and it's clearly taken a lot of inspiration from the Vision EQXX concept. And the biggest change is this flat dashboard design. Now, not only is it intended to give you more room than in, say, the EQE, which has a more slanted infotainment system, but it also creates this one-panel design, which I have to admit is quite overwhelming when you first get in the car. You get a 10-inch driver display as standard, a 14-inch central infotainment screen, and an additional, and if you want it, optional 14-inch screen for the passenger. Coming back to the infotainment system, this is the 4th generation of Merc's MBUX system, and I have to admit, it seems pretty impressive. This is the first infotainment system on the market that integrates AI from both Microsoft and Google, and it also gets a ChatGPT 4.0 driven voice recognition system. Now, I've never really got on with any voice recognition system, including the ChatGPT powered systems in the latest VW products, but I have had a little play with this one, and it does seem to work pretty seamlessly. Another thing that I really like is that the navigation system is Google Maps based, and that's great because Mercedes has taken the best Maps navigation system that you can currently get on the market, and then it's tweaked it to work specifically with this car. So if you put a destination into here, Google Maps will take into account your current state of charge, the topography of the route, how bad the traffic is, and how many charge stops you need before you get to your destination. That is really clever and a welcome addition. I'm less sure about this optional 14-inch passenger display. Now, it's very quick to respond, as is the main infotainment system, and you can even play 4K movies on here. However, when your passenger is watching a movie, That's not blanked off. It doesn't have any sort of special cover over it so that the driver can't see it. Instead, Mercedes has got around the problem of distraction by ensuring that when the driver looks over at the screen, it turns off completely. And it also turns off for your passenger. And it's done that because there's a little camera here that watches your face all the time. But I'm not sure how effective that is. We've just played the movie Venom on here, and it seems pretty distracting to me, even if it's only in my periphery. Your passenger can even play Xbox games on here, such as Forza Horizon. And again, I just think surely that's going to be distracting to the driver. I don't know, we'll have to see how it works in practice, but I feel like they've missed a trick by not going down the route of Audi or Porsche with their special blanking coating on there. The layout of this 4th generation MBUX system is also pretty intuitive, and that's because, let's face it, it looks just like an iPhone, right down to the fact that you can group your apps like this. I do wonder if Tim Cook is going to have anything to say about that, because it does look very familiar to my iPhone software. Now, it would be fair to say that in recent years, Mercedes has dropped the ball a bit when it comes to build quality, but I am pleased to report that even this pre-production car feels really well screwed together. Okay, if you look a bit further down, there are some harder plastics, but at eye level, everything feels very well screwed together. And I particularly like this new center console because this is not plastic. This is real aluminium trim. You even get it on the doors here. And if you don't like that design, you can have a variety of open pore wood designs, or my particular favorite is a new paper material which is laminated, but it has a really nice feel and texture to it. Mercedes is also really proud of this new door card design because it features one continual piece of man-made leather. You can also get real leather if that's what you fancy, but I expect that to be on one of the higher trims. In terms of storage, you're pretty well catered for. This particular car has a wireless charging pad up here, and further back you've got a place for 2 cup holders. Under your arm, you have a fairly deep center bin, and down here you've kind of got this floating design where you can put odds and ends, maybe your wallet or another phone. If I had one complaint, it's that the access to the door bin is pretty narrow, so it's not going to be easy to put a water bottle in there or extract it, more importantly. But you do get these lovely chrome-plated covers for your speakers if you go for the Burmeister sound system. So overall, I would say this is a real step in the right direction for Mercedes interiors. Now, the CLA has never been a particularly spacious car in the back, but Mercedes has made some big improvements with this new model. The wheelbase, for example, is 61 millimeters longer. That's the space between the front and the rear wheels. And the upside is that you get a lot more legroom. In the old car, I would have found my knees rubbing on the back of the front seat, but not in here. Mercedes has also learned a valuable lesson, I suspect, from Tesla, because all CLAs now get a panoramic roof as standard, and that has 2 benefits. Not only does it make the interior feel more open and airy, but it also means that you get a lot more headroom. You get 16 millimeters more headroom in the front and 28 millimeters more headroom in the back. Now, if I sit back, you'll see that I don't have a lot of room going spare, but at 5'9", I'm pretty comfortable back here. You can get your CLA with 1 or 2 zone climate control, but one thing I really do like is that all CLAs come with these air vents in the back for rear passengers. It's also great that all CLAs come as standard with 4 USB-C slots that can put out 100 watts of power. That's great for kids in the back who want to charge their iPhone or iPads on the move. One thing I don't like, however, is that the rear windows only go down this far. That's not great if you're prone to car sickness and you want to crank the window. When it comes to boot space, Mercedes has also learned something else from its American rival, because for the first time on a modern Mercedes, we have a frunk, or a fruit if you live in the UK. And that is super useful because while the rear boot is a decent size, it's long, but it's quite shallow. This gives you an extra 101 litres of space. It's definitely big enough to fit in a carry-on suitcase. I also ran a long-term EQE, and that didn't have a frunk, and I have to admit, I got fed up of throwing my dirty charge cable in the boot with the rest of my luggage, so having a dedicated place for it is really useful. If you're also wondering why I said this is the first modern Mercedes to have a frunk, that's because 90 years ago, in 1931, Mercedes actually produced a rear-engined car called the W23 that also had a front boot. How's that for a nerdy fact? There's no word on pricing for the CLA, and there's no word on the trims that will be coming to the UK, but the current petrol CLA starts at around about £33,000, so you can expect a bit of a premium for the new hybrid model. The electric CLA, meanwhile, we've been given a bit more of a steer. We can expect that to come in at just under the BMW i4, so expect somewhere in the mid-40s. What we can tell you is the electric CLA will be available to order in the summer, and the hybrid will be coming later, sometime towards the end of the year.